Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, SYSPRO 8. We're going to provide an update. Just before I get started, quick show of hands if you don't mind. Can you hear me okay? If you could pop a hand up or two. I see some hands going up there, fantastic. And can you see the screen? It should have a PowerPoint slide with the lovely new Nexus logo. SYSPRO 8 update, I see a lot more hands coming up as well, fantastic. We're right on the hour. I know that there are a few people still joining us. We're going to kick off right away. Welcome to today's session. As I said earlier, it's all about SYSPRO 8, and we're going to focus not just on the latest release, but today's session is also going to provide a refresher on everything to do with SYSPRO 8, because I am conscious that not everyone that's joining us today is necessarily on 8 or on a particular version of 8. Today, joining me, I have Roxanne Govender. Welcome, Roxanne.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, Roxanne has been in and around the SYSPRO ecosystem for 15 years. She's actually been a consultant helping customers implement SYSPRO for the last 9 years, 5 of those here in the UK. I'm sure she's a familiar face for a number of you. You'll have seen her in and out of your businesses. For myself, my name's Darshni Shah. I'm the product manager here with Nexus. So introductions out of the way, let's kick off. I'm going to switch off the webcam. You know what we look like now. I want you to focus on the content that we have to present to you today. So as we move along, today what we're going to talk about is the version of 8. Now, before I do that, what I'd like to do is revisit the journey and life of SYSPRO a little bit. I'm not going to get too far into the history, but SYSPRO is an ERP system that's been growing for well over 40 years. And just to cover and perhaps see a copy of where you're currently sitting at, gives you a sense of SYSPRO 6 issue 9, one of the older releases, not necessarily the oldest one, is almost 20 years old when it was released, but it is being retired for just over 10 years. Now, most of you will probably be sitting either on SYSPRO 7 Update 1, that's just under 10 years old. If you are currently on 7, you need to be aware that it is going to be retiring this July 2023. With SYSPRO 7 being retired, what that means is there will be no additional changes being added into that particular system. You'll still be supported on it. You can still call your friendly Nexus help desk system. They'll be able to provide you help with it. But if there are any error corrections needed, the development team at SYSPRO will be not able to have those changes. Let's talk about SYSPRO 8, the release and version we're here to talk about today. SYSPRO 8 has been now out in the wild for almost 5 years. This July, it will be 5 years old. And within that lifespan, we've had 8 releases of SYSPRO 8 itself. And with each successive release, we've had more and more new functionality added in. The latest release of SYSPRO 8 was just introduced. It's about a month old now. It was released in February of this year, and that's the current release. The next one, we're anticipating that to be coming out as of July 2023. So now that we've talked a little bit about releases, what I'd like to know is what version of SYSPRO are you currently running? And just a quick poll, and I'm going to launch up. If you wouldn't mind answering for me, where are you currently sitting at? Is it 8, SYSPRO 7, 6, or older? And I can see over half of you have already voted. Give it a couple other seconds. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. So we have just over half of you already on SYSPRO 8, 27% sitting on 7, 14% on 6.1 or older, and there's one who's on 6 trying to move to 8. Fantastic. Now, we talk a little bit about the context of today's presentation, and I want to talk about this in the realm of where the industry sits. Now, we know that there's constant change that's happening. One of the changes that we see here in the UK is a significant demand for quality control. There's no longer a race for the lowest cost, the lowest dollar. We're now looking at who's going to be providing us the right information, the right product for the quality that our end consumers are demanding. And there has been that shift that's been growing over the last decade or so, especially here in the UK and a lot of the new economies shifting towards that. We've been talking about a shift away from manual systems for a long time. This was accelerated with COVID, the decrease in the workforce in the UK in particular. We've got statistics that talk about the decrease in workforce. I saw a statistic from Make UK the other day that talked about the fact that we now have 300,000 less workers here in the UK as of Brexit. With all of that, there's a push for businesses to do more with the existing systems. And the less we have to do manually, the more we can automate, the easier it becomes for us to focus on things that are important in the business. With that, there is always the always-on expectation, depending on where you are in the world as well. We've had interconnectedness for a long time, collaboration and innovation, but this is not just within our business, it's up and down the supply chain as well. We're starting to understand that as we work more collaboratively, both with our suppliers as well as our customers, we have the opportunity for innovation, and it's about providing tools to facilitate that. There's also a transition from just-in-time inventory to just-in-case inventory as supply chain challenges become more and more augmented. And as always, we want to do more with that rich information that ERP always stores because you have an end-to-end view of your business in a single system. Now you can leverage that and build up on that power to have meaningful intelligence to drive business behavior. With that context of industry, it's about SYSPRO then helping and leveraging businesses succeed a little bit better. And with this, I'd like to provide a pillar. Now, if you've heard me speak before, you'll joke about how product managers, we love to talk about pillars. We like to put things into buckets. SYSPRO is no different. The SYSPRO corporate team have built these 5 pillars among which we want to go ahead and add improvements. The first is the improved control of internal operations, what happens within our own 4 walls. These are improvements that we believe we want to add into the system that will make you do things even better. So we're going to talk about some of the improvements SYSPRO has introduced within that realm. Interconnectedness, we talked about that with the innovation, the possibility and improvements that we have, and the supply chain becoming such an important part. It's becoming part of normal vernacular. Media is talking about it when only manufacturers would talk about it within industry. That connected world is becoming more important, and so SYSPRO is focused on improving our business's abilities to deliver on that. Wrapped around that, of course, is the need to introduce organizational controls and improve on the organizational controls. Because as soon as you open up information, you want to make sure that you're securing who has access to that at what point in time as well. And then we talked about the importance of using that rich data and actually driving organizational behavior as a result of it. So the information and intelligence element of it is so incredibly important as a wrapper around it. And the last pillar is a newest pillar that was introduced by Paolo D'Amatos, the Chief Product Officer of SYSPRO, at our customer event in the fall of last year. That's the digital business platform. The move towards digitalization has been occurring here in the UK, and that vernacular has been shifting for quite a few years, but it's become all the more important today as we're finding ourselves in very uncertain business climate. So this is now just the context within which we're going to introduce some of the functionality. I wanted to set the scene. So let's switch into why you're here today. What's new in SYSPRO 8? I'm going to start out with the digital business platform, the components associated with that. You'll see all of the pillars that we talked about earlier, internal operations, the connected world, the organizational changes, information intelligence, all underpinning that digital business platform. Now, for a number of you that have joined us today, you will already be familiar with and leveraging a tool such as Nexus's data switch solution. That allows you to both provide the workflow process orchestration and the connectors that are so important in that digital world. It's about taking information from one system to another, one company to another, one organizational unit to another, and seamlessly transforming it so that it's performing the task that a human being might have had to in the flow that you would expect it to. Additional tools that we have coming out include some information designer, data modeling tools that allow you to leverage some of that information that's there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Improvements in and around security and governance. We'll also go into a little bit more detail around that. An application designer, I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes and how that improves our ability to extend the SYSPRO ecosystem and solution for the business specific to your needs. And then the innovation lab, of course, continues to play with things such as cognitive services and leveraging some of the newer technology and making it relevant to our businesses. And it's not necessarily just about playing with the cool tech, which, let's face it, most technologists love to do. We love to talk about geeky things like that, but it's about making them relevant. So I want to focus on one thing in particular, and that's the application designer. What's interesting is when we had our annual customer event, one of our guest speakers was Dave Pearson. He's a customer that's been in the UK SYSPRO ecosystem for going on 15, 20 years. And he talked about the improvements that SYSPRO had made about 15 years ago in the VB scripting engine and the ability to customize. And with that, he said, I actually had epiphany. And that epiphany was that all of these lovely extensions I was building out of SYSPRO, I could now bring into SYSPRO. At the event, he saw the application designer being presented. And this is something that's new, available just with 2022. And that's where David came up and said, I've had Epiphany 2.0. So what is this application designer that gave Dave, a citizen developer, his second epiphany? It's the ability to be able to customize and extend SYSPRO with a tool built right within SYSPRO itself. Now, this is a very busy screenshot. I'm not going to go through all of the details by any means, but what this allows you to do is create your own extensions by adding in things such as charts, forms, elements that would be important for your end users to engage with them. In the middle, you're visually able to see what it is that you're building out as you're building it out. And on the right-hand side, what you're seeing are the tools that allow you to edit and manipulate and update those controls really quickly and easily. And by leveraging this tool, you're able to build a program such as this that's available and accessible directly within SYSPRO that pulls information not just from SYSPRO, customized information that you have also stored in SYSPRO, but also external information such as Dun & Bradstreet credit report information that's making external calls and surfacing that information up right within SYSPRO itself. So the power of this tool and the ease of design makes the tool so much more powerful. And that allows you to extend SYSPRO for your end users far more simply than you've been able to even before. So the application designer is something that we'll spend a lot more time talking about in future webinars, but I wanted to touch on that really briefly. Let's move on to the next section, which is information and intelligence, the next pillar. There are a number of tools that are available. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. The first one is a brand new tool that SYSPRO's launched with the latest release, which is embedded analytics. The next one I'm going to talk about are insights. Now, insight tiles have been with us for a number of years, but they allow us to surface information at the right time to the right individual. These insight tiles can be supported by business activity queries. Now, business activity queries was a new piece of functionality that was introduced in one of the later releases of SYSPRO 8. For those that are used to spending quite a bit of time in SQL to build out queries, think of the business activity query as a tool to allow you to do that right within SYSPRO. You still have the security layer, but you're building those queries right within SYSPRO, which means you can now leverage that in other areas of SYSPRO, be it reports, be it insight tiles. So you've now got additional power to access that data and start mining it. Search. We always want to know how much easier it is to access the information that we have. And so search continues to be improved over and over again. And we've got a whole other webinar that goes into just some of the functionality that we've improved in SYSPRO in and around search. I want to talk a little bit about reporting. You'll be familiar with SYSPRO reporting services in the SYSPRO ecosystem that uses the Crystal engine to produce and provide documents as well as reports. And the current releases Most of you will be familiar with the fact that we're using a version of Crystal called Crystal 2016. With the latest release, we have now updated that to use Crystal 2020. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is data access and subscription, and that is a new module called OData. I won't spend too much time. I don't want to show you a little bit about that. But before I do that, let's talk a little bit about embedded analytics. There's a lot more information available on it. With the current release, we have a dashboard designer that allows you to surface SYSPRO and external information up into charts, gauges, as you can see, bubble graphs, although I have to say I do struggle with bubble graphs. I always feel like I want to pop the bubble wrap, but that's me. It's now a dashboard that you can build to surface important insights right within your system. And there are a number of out-of-the-box templates that SYSPRO is pre-baked. A couple of things that you need to be mindful of about this new tool. It is a licensed module, so it's something additional, and it does have some additional infrastructure requirements as well. We're continuing to evaluate the impact of the infrastructure requirements, so that's something that we can continue to talk about and we will be presenting in future sessions. The OData has been out for about 2 releases now. The OData is also another licensed module, but this is fundamentally the equivalent of what we used to call ODBC to access information outside of SYSPRO, tap into that rich data and pull it out into things like Excel. It's modernizing the architecture, modernizing the way that you're pulling it in. You connect up using an OData feed, and all of a sudden you've got a table full of information that's pulling directly from SYSPRO. The benefit of OData is the fact that you potentially have performance improvements from ODBC depending on the complexity of the query that you have, and potentially speed as well. There's a bit of improvement in there. But I've talked at you a lot. Let's start looking at some things. And I want to focus a little bit on insights. And for that, Roxana, I'm going to switch over to you if I may. Let you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Okay. So business insight tiles were introduced into the product to provide a dashboard view of relevant data sets, which can be used to drive action by bubbling information to respective users based on a specified criteria. It provides a visual cue in order for you to trigger an action. SYSPRO has a deck of tiles that comes standard with the product and is updated with each release. For example, I have my tile here that tells me I have 26 back orders in this company. If I click on the tile, I'm able to drill down into the details of the 26 back orders. And from here, I can interrogate the sales order, the customer, and the lot number. I also have this GL financial statement query. Once again, a standard tile that comes with the product. And in this, I have a very simple income statement and balance sheet based off the data on SYSPRO. This, like any grid view in SYSPRO, can be exported into Excel. Just click on that. Here is my export into Excel. I also have the customers on hold. In my customers on hold, I can see that I have 4 customers who are on hold currently. When I click on this, I can go into the customer. I can go into the customer setup. And here I have the option to uncheck the customer on hold button and save it. I've also embedded a tile against the customer, which tells me how many back orders the specific customer has on the system. I can click on the back orders and I can have a look at the list of back orders and interrogate by sales order. So back orders for a distribution environment might be important because back orders on the system might indicate potentially lost sales or reduced speed to market. So these tiles can be important depending on where you publish them. Okay, I'm going to save this and close it. Once I refresh my tiles, you will see my customers on hold now has updated to 3. The data on these tiles are in real time. They're succinct and can be published at a global level, at a master data level, and at a transactional level. So here I have a tile because I wanted to know how many stock codes I have or how much of stock I have in my finished goods warehouse that has not moved for the last 6 months. So when I click into it, I get a list of all of these stock items. And this can be used from a financial perspective in order to calculate your obsolescence provision. It can also be used in a sales and marketing environment in order to see what you could sell off the shelf. This is true to any grid view that you have on SYSPRO. So I can right click on any of the headings. I can go down to auto sum and I can column sum. And this gives me the total value of my stock that has not moved in the last 6 months in my finished goods warehouse. These tiles are extremely flexible and easy to create because it is backed by SQL queries. Therefore, you are able to create KPI and metric tiles, which helps you drive your business with information at your fingertips. Thank you. Darshini, back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Roxanne. So hopefully you've got a taste of those insight tiles that you can go ahead and use to drive some business behavior as well. Be curious to know how many of you are already using insight tiles. So if in the chat you want to send me a quick message, that would be great. But I'm going to move along to improved organizational controls. Whistle-stop tour. 3 key areas that SYSPRO has been focusing on. The first one, system management around this, financial management, and enterprise management. Some of the highlights that we have in and around system management with SYSPRO 8 is the ability to do single sign-on. What this means is I can go ahead and have my operator go ahead and link in with things like Active Directory. On the client itself, when I launch SYSPRO, it will automatically sign me on. So if you, like me, have a 16-character password, because that's what we're required here at Nexus, it means I don't have to type that 16-character password in multiple times. It's just automatically bringing that in. The other element that was introduced also to improve the security and the system management is multi-factor authentication. This is the joyful part where, when you log in and you want to check your email and you've got your 2-factor authentication. So you need to go in and log into an app or enter in an email and validate that you are who you say you are. This now allows you to secure the business information that you have within SYSPRO. So the multi-factor authentication is also quite important. SQL only. Now, SYSPRO 8 is the version that we've transitioned almost every single file that we can into SQL, and you'll have seen improvements as each release comes on. So with 8 itself, we had the bulk of the files move in. Within the life of 8, we had things such as your reports transition over and your documents from flat file into SQL, which means that the way that you're perhaps modifying your reports, the way that you might have been used to, might need to change as you're moving from one version to another. The latest release of SYSPRO 8, we've now taken customization files and taken them from a flat file structure over into SQL. So if you're used to creating your own VB scripts and engaging with that, be aware of that. You now used to use the front-end tools to be able to update that information. Installation and updates, we've transitioned from ports to hotfixes and releases from SYSPRO 7 to SYSPRO 8, and now it just behaves like you would Windows updates. You can go in and uninstall them, maintain them, manage them far more simply. There are a whole plethora of administrative dashboards that have been released to help you manage and understand the health of SYSPRO, be it the application itself, be it the SQL Server. And Paul Cole, the technical liaison manager, and I had a webinar that presented and did a deeper dive into these administrative dashboards last month. So if that's something that you're focusing on and want to learn a little bit more about, please feel free to reach out if you missed that live. Your account manager should be able to point you to a recording of that. The last thing I want to talk about in the system management, as always, when you continue on that support, we are linked quite closely with Microsoft, so the support for Office 365 continually gets improved. Let's move on to financial and enterprise management. Now, multi-currency, currency exchange rate fluctuations, especially in the last few months, have been incredibly acute. Just this morning, we had an announcement by the Bank of England talking about an interest rate hike, and that in fact, of course, as always, has an impact on currency. So if you're buying or selling from anyone outside of the UK, this has an impact on us, and we want the system to manage and maintain and reflect changes in those currency. Doesn't mean that we're automatically updating that currency, but you want to make sure that the accurate currency fluctuations are captured at a transaction level and improvements continue in that. On the enterprise front, as you're managing your treasury, you're finding a lot more organizations amalgamating and moving towards shared services. And this is where group payments, where you might have one parent entity responsible for taking care of the payments for multiple subsidiaries or multiple other business units. It's about reflecting those shared payments coming through into your bank accounts and easily capturing them into SYSPRO itself. Detailed posting to control accounts, and being able to reconcile them really quickly. When you have the detail, you're able to go ahead and pull that through. And that's a nice functionality that was added into one of the earlier releases of SYSPRO 8. You can enable that at the account level. Month-end processing, inevitably the bane of most of the accountants, and making sure you do that as quickly as possible. And improvements in both the balancing and the month-end are always the focus as you move more and more towards shorter cycles and cutting that down. And then cash flow management. With the interest rate hike, we know that borrowing and the cost of borrowing increases. So it's all the more important to make sure that you're pulling as much of that revenue that is outstanding in. And dunning is something that was introduced very early on in SYSPRO 8 that really does help. It's amazing the number of customers that have already come into that particular version and leverage that functionality to see a simple improvement in that cash flow as a result of this. So when I talk about dunning, fundamentally what I mean is the ability for you to automatically generate a letter that's the equivalent of a statement that you would possibly send out, but this is now augmented by specific messaging that's tied to the type of status that that customer falls into. When I talk about status, what I'm talking about is, in this particular instance, you might have a customer that's pretty good at paying on time. You just want to encourage them to pay as close to on time as possible, perhaps even a little bit earlier. So the messaging you're going to use to engage with them is going to be a lot softer. Friendly reminder, your outstanding invoice is due in 10 days, might prompt a little bit of a sooner payment. Whereas the one that you know is always going to be pushing that 90-day boundary, you're going to want to be a lot sterner, and you don't want to cross-pollinate those messages. So it's about automating that and making that a lot simpler and freeing up the time of that individual that's responsible for managing this by automatically sending that through. So hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the power of that dunning system. I do think the latest functionality, which is kind of the iteration around shared services and payments, is great to showcase. I'm actually going to hand over to Roxanne again to take us through that a little bit. Thanks, Roxanne.
No problem. Okay, so we're going to go into accounts payable and accounts receivable group payments. So the functionality was introduced into SYSPRO in order to cater for payments or allocations to payments to invoices across multiple customers or suppliers across different companies in varying currencies. The process was introduced to cater for shared services within the customer and supplier base. For example, one customer who will pay a consolidated amount for multiple invoices which span across multiple customers or currencies, either within one SYSPRO company or multiple SYSPRO companies. Likewise, this allows you to pay your suppliers and their invoices across different SYSPRO companies in one payment run. The two new programs that were introduced to facilitate this process is the AR Group Payment Run and the AP Group Payment Run. So if we go into the AR Group Payment Run, what you will see is a screen that basically tells us, nominates how we're going to pay. We will nominate a payment run number. We will then enter the customer who has actually paid the full invoice value or paid the amount into our bank account. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to enter 1,500 euros. You will enter your journal reference numbers and things like that, which we would normally do. At the bottom of the screen, you will see a grid, and the primary customer, so the customer who is originally paid the amount into our bank account, will be the first customer that will always be on this list. At this point, we can see the outstanding balance of that customer, and you can nominate a percentage amount or a valued amount from this 1,500 that you want to allocate to this customer. If you don't want to allocate anything to this customer and the entire amount was paid to cater for other customers, you can just leave this line blank. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to say 500 of the 1,500 euros is going to be for invoices against customer 9. We will click against the allocation button that's on the end of the screen. And this screen opens up, which tells me to identify the invoices that this 500 pertains to. I will click on add invoice, and then this I can now enter the invoice manually of the remittance, or I can click on the invoice little search button and I can choose an invoice from the grid. So I'm going to choose the first invoice. I'm going to say the whole 500 goes to this invoice and close. What you will see here is the 500 euros has been allocated to this customer in this company, and I have an unallocated amount left of 1,000 euros. I will click on add customer, and at this point, the beauty of this program kicks in, because I can either allocate to a different company. So I have my SYSPRO FIFO company. And if I click on the magnifying glass for customers, at this point, I can either link to a predetermined list of customers, or at this point, if it's a customer that I haven't linked to my primary customer, I can go ahead and add it at this point. So I'm going to choose my FIFO company, and I'm going to choose my customer 14, who's actually in GBP. I'm going to say that the 500 euros of this amount needs to be allocated to this GBP amount. You can see SYSPRO does the calculation in currency automatically. Here is the exchange rate, and at this point, you can either change the exchange rate or use this exchange rate, which comes from the currency table. You will see I have another 500 euros that I need to allocate. So I'm just going to go ahead and allocate that. So now that that's done, my full total has been allocated. I will save my payment run. I have the option to authorize it. If you don't want to authorize it, you could just go directly to post. At the point of posting, SYSPRO standard process takes over, where I will be able to print my cash book deposit slip, which will integrate this payment into the cash book of my FB bank in this company. And when you go into the other customers, my customer 14 from the FIFO company and my customer 10, you will see that their invoices have downdated and updated with this payment run number. We then have the AP group payment run, which allows you to pay multiple suppliers across different companies. Works very similar to the payment cycle payment run, where you would enter a payment run number, you would enter the payment details, and at the bottom of the grid, you would link the suppliers and their invoices, whether the suppliers in this company or in an alternate company. Once you're done, there's a payment cycle button here on the top, and it's the same 3 buttons in standard SYSPRO payment cycle maintenance, which is execute the payment run, print your checks and remittances, and then integrate to your cash book. And yeah, that's basically how you would process group payments. I'll hand you back to Darshni now.
Thanks for taking us through that. And with that, hopefully you're starting to see that extension that we've got, not just for cross-company payments, but also that enterprise function where we're moving more and more towards shared services, either within your own business or up and down your supply chain. Speaking of supply chain, we're moving on to the next pillar of supply chain and the connected world. There are a number of new additions that have been added into SYSPRO that help you with that. The first thing is, if you are now having a more aggressive sourcing strategy, you may actually be going out and bidding, tendering a little bit more, managing that tendering process and actually going out to procure quotes is something that we find a lot more companies are shifting towards, and having a more dedicated process that reflects in your system itself is provided with the request for quote system. Nice, simple, robust mechanism. That request for quote is also fed nicely into the supply chain portal. The supply chain portal was introduced first with the earlier release of 2019 and slowly has been augmenting up. It is a simpler module that is growing with each release. With the first release, it was the ability to go ahead and bubble up supplier information and engage with that request for quote and managing that bidding process. We've seen the addition of customer information added onto that and being able to go ahead and surface up and see invoice details or statements. We're looking forward to additional releases of SYSPRO improving on that portal functionality as supply chains and exposure and inter-supply chain collaboration becomes more and more important to businesses, particularly here in the UK. In the unfortunate event that you do have to return something back to your supplier, there is the return to supplier capability built into SYSPRO itself that allows you perhaps to send that item back to the supplier for a refund. Or you may have the ability to have them repair it. And all of those options are managed within that return to supplier functionality. As we're starting to see increases in challenges to accessing raw material, perhaps specifically for manufacturing companies, but also with distribution, we're finding that people are diversifying and spreading their portfolio so that you're not necessarily just reliant on one supplier, or if you are reliant on a supplier, you're really strengthening that supplier relationship. And one of the earlier releases of SYSPRO 8, the introduction of sourcing policies really helps streamline that process for you and augments that functionality. Rather than going in and explaining the details of the sourcing policy, I think it's important that we actually show you what that looks like a little bit. So I'm going to hand that back to Roxanne really briefly for her to take us through what options are available with that sourcing policy. But again, as you're seeing it, keep that supply chain process in the back of your mind. What are you doing in terms of spreading the risk for the key raw material that you need in your house? So over to you, Roxanne.
Thank you, Darshini. Okay, so speaking of sourcing policies are basically set up against a stock code. So I'm just going to enter my stock code here, 1, 2. And I'm going to just talk you through the different types of sourcing policies that we have. So sourcing policies allows you the flexibility of adding a policy against a specific stock code, which will then allow the system to suggest a preferred supplier based on that policy. The options we have is round robin. So round robin provides us with a list of suppliers and a status or a sequence. Basically, every time there is a suggested purchase, the system will generate a preferred supplier based on that status in a rotational basis. And once all the suppliers on this list has been used up, it will start from the beginning. Then we have multi-sourcing. Multi-sourcing is a threshold amount is required either by quantity or by value, and proportional percentages are defined against multiple suppliers. This means that when the percentage of the total spend is allocated to each supplier in a sourcing policy, the system then selects the next preferred supplier once the allocated percentage, the value that is in this block, has been exhausted. We have lowest cost and lowest cost within due date. Lowest cost and lowest cost within due date both take information out of the stock code supplier cross-reference table. So all the suppliers that we've purchased from, what their cost is and their lead time. Lowest cost works purely on which is the cheapest, and lowest cost within due date works off which is the cheapest with the shortest lead time. We then have supplier by stock code, which is our stock standard. This stock code you will purchase from the supplier. It's my preferred supplier. And supplier by warehouse works with, you will set up a preferred supplier against the stock code, but you could potentially have a preferred supplier against a specific warehouse purely for proximity reasons, where it might make more sense to purchase from a supplier which is closest to that warehouse. That essentially sums up what the sourcing policy is. Whatever you've set up against the sourcing policy for the stock code, when the system generates a purchase, either through requirements planning or manually, whatever the sourcing policy is here, those rules will apply. Thank you, Darshni. I'll just hand it back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks. And it's interesting, the supplier by warehouse, the other element that really does help with that is if you think about sustainability, if you're starting and getting a push on sustainability reporting and having to manage where you're purchasing based on that, that's something that would actually help and facilitate that particular purchasing decision. All right, we're shifting right along. Internal operations, we're now moving into what's happening within your own business, directly within your own four walls. And three categories within that are improvements that SYSPRO has introduced in and around warehouse management, operations, and quality. Now, when we talk about warehouse, we know that within the Nexus suite, we also have some robust solutions that allow you to extend into the warehouse on mobile devices using a tool such as Translution. If you need more specific warehouse management functionality, such as directed putaways, directed picking, we've got the Orchard tool that's available as well. But if you've got slightly more simplistic needs and you want to augment and extend the visibility that you have or the inventory control that you have within the warehouse, there's some great new functionality that we want to talk about here. Now, we talked about just-in-case inventory, and that becomes a lot more important as we've got shifts in the ecosystem. And I'm curious, actually, just with a really quick show of hands for those that are around, have you actually made a shift to just-in-case inventory? If yes, I'd love to see a couple of hands go up here. Okay, interesting. So not as many as I would have expected. Well, hopefully inventory control still becomes a little bit more important associated with you. And overall with that, it's about increasing that visibility and identifying who's doing what at what particular point in time. Three specific areas that have been improved in SYSPRO itself is the picking process, the ability to replenish to make sure that you have the right raw material at the right time for production or right delivery at the right time. And that's where if you're implementing tools such as Kanban to pull that in, and of course, making sure that you're counting and having really good visibility of that stock. What does that actually mean? How does that look like? Well, Roxanne gets to do the hard work yet again.
Thank you, Darshni. Okay, so we're going to start off with cycle count, and then we're going to do a bit of skipping around. So cycle counts were introduced in SYSPRO 8 to cater for the cyclical cycle count process as opposed to a full annual stock take. The biggest advantage of cycle counts is that you can create multiple cycle counts within the same warehouse in advance. And the confirmation of the cycle count is not warehouse dependent. Similar to the current process, you will have a stock take selection, you will have a paper-based count, a stock capture, and a variance analysis and confirmation. So you can create counts well in advance, and it only gets processed at the time that it is required. So here you will see I've created cycle counts for my next 5 weeks, but it's only week 13 that I have started. When I'm ready to start week 14, I will click on action and click cycle count, and it is at this time that the snapshot gets taken. Once the count has started, you have the option to print the cycle count form that SYSPRO provides, or you can print your own SRS document. It's your choice. I've started the cycle count and I am ready for people to go ahead and count it, I can then go into the new functionality called missions and tasks. And in a mission and task review, so I'm just going to click review here. I'm going to come back to the screen a little bit later and speak about it a little bit more. But I just want to show you how I can assign a cycle count to a specific team or a specific person. So here's my cycle count number 13, so my week 13, and there's all the stock codes that I need to count in that cycle count. I have the option within missions and tasks to click on stock code. So I can say I want all the stock codes that begins with A, and I want to assign that to a specific person or a specific team. And by assigning this work, then I can basically give them a task to go ahead and count them. So once that's done, the operators will go ahead and count the stock, and then we get into the stock take capture. So if I go into my cycle count 13, this is my stock take capture. And as you can see, I've already captured stock against the cycle count, but you would simply just go down the list for the codes that have been counted, and you will enter the quantities that were captured. You will then click post. Once I post that count, then either someone else, or depending on your segregation of duties, you then have the option to review and confirm the count. So when I go into review and confirm the count, I'm going to go back into my count 13, and I have a list of all of the stock codes. I have a list of the quantities that were captured, and here I have a list of actions. So everything where I counted what I had, I'm happy to accept that. Wherever there was a discrepancy between what I had in stock versus what I captured, I have the ability to recount. When I click apply recounts, this then updates the capture screen and zeros the quantities against the captured value, which means the operators then go ahead, do the second count and come back. Once I'm happy that the counts are accurate and I'm happy to just accept it, I can click accept all lines, and then I can just go ahead and confirm the cycle count. This then has the option to do one of two things. SYSPRO has introduced a lost and found warehouse. So in the lost and found warehouse, I can either put in all over counted items into that warehouse to be transferred at a later stage, into that bin, sorry, to be transferred at a later stage, or I can just post the cycle count immediately. And that ends the cycle count process. The second thing I want to speak about is our Kanban process. Now, the Kanban process within SYSPRO was released in SYSPRO 8, and it creates a pull system which allows you to trigger a transaction on the back of a stock depletion transaction. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go into the configuration and the setup, because you will set up a relationship and you will set up a trigger. So I'm going to go into my bin maintenance. I'm going to choose my warehouse raw material, RM, and I'm going to start my review. And here you can see I've created in my raw material warehouse for my stock code B112, I've created a bulk bin and a pick bin. And what I've said here is that every time my stock goes below 3, I would like you to pull stock from bulk and a maximum of 5. And this needs to happen every time there's a production or a work in progress trigger. So once I've configured that, what then happens is, I'm just going to close this and go no. I'm going to go into job issues, and I'm going to issue B1122 to a job. So I've created my job 607. I'm going to go into specific issues, and I'm just going to select my B112. I'm going to issue 5. And here you can see I have in my bulk warehouse 189, and I have in my pick warehouse 5. So I'm going to select this 5, add to list. So now if I go back into missions and tasks, and if I click refresh missions, I see a transaction here at the bottom which is a bin transfer from bulk to a pick for my B112. If I click on it and I go complete, this on the back of this complete button actually does the bin transfer. So if I go now into inventory query, I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of clicking around, but just to show you the full picture, if we go into inventory query and I click on B112, and if I just scroll down here to movements, you will see on the 23rd, which is today, I had an issue of 5 to my job. And then when I clicked complete on the Kanban process, you will see there was a bin transfer from bin transfer of 5 from my bulk bin to my pick bin. Just on missions and tasks, you can review by the normal selections. You can go through this on your own. But essentially, this is where you will basically review all the system generated tasks that have been activated off a transaction in another part of the system. Okay, that's me done. Thank you, Darshini. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Roxanne. So we're starting to see a lot more of what's happening within our warehouse starting to get reflected, and the microtransactions also available within SYSPRO. So great short trip in and around the warehouse functionality. We're really whizzing through these. Thanks, Roxanne.
Sorry.
No. It's the amount of time and the richness of information.
Yes.
Operations management. That's the next pillar that I want to talk about. Now, if you've joined me on these sessions before, SYSPRO has a module called Manufacturing Operations Management that allows you to schedule and identify what's going to be happening within your production environment for the next week, month, year, depending on how your production cycles run. Once you schedule that, your schedulers will be able to have a visual view of being able to see that and identify which machines are going to be used, which work centers, which employees. You publish that out so the rest of your business is able to see what's going to happen at what point in time. Once it's published and you've now continued in the manufacturing cycle, you begin collecting information on that, be it for your individual employees that they're working on or machine information. And as you start collecting that, you're getting a real-time picture of that production floor emulated within the system, which then allows you to track what's happening, the availability of jobs, availability of capacity, and start to analyze that to then, of course, improve so that you're focusing on your schedule going forward. I won't get into too much more detail around manufacturing operations management, but if it is something you're interested in, we've, like I say, also got additional recordings that go into far more detail around that. But if production pain points are something that you're worried about in your business, it's something worth taking a look at. Now, on the quality side of things, we have seen improvements in SYSPRO with little iterations being added as the releases have matured over the years. By no means are we introducing a full-blown quality system. I'm not going to say that if you have stringent quality requirements that you need, if you're in a highly regulated industry, you will still need a quality system that we would look to integrate SYSPRO to. However, if you have smaller in-process quality requirements, you perhaps have some small recall requirements, you start needing to capture additional information against that. SYSPRO's expanded the functionality that allows us to then leverage and improve on that. And I want, Roxanne, if you could show a small tidbit of this, if you could.
Yes, sure. Okay. Oops, there we go. Okay, so just in a nutshell, SYSPRO 8 introduced lot recall, and in conjunction with lot recall, SYSPRO also introduced the concept of additional lot numbers. So what an additional lot number allows us to do is, if I just enter my lot number, it allows us the flexibility of adding a supplier lot number to our lot number, so the SYSPRO generated lot number. And then this creates a link between them both in the system. Where this is really beneficial is if we ever needed to do a product recall, or if a supplier ever called in and said they needed to recall their lot, we have the option to go into a recall. We can either do a mock recall or we can do a full recall. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to do a mock recall. And under selections, here I have the option to either do a recall by the supplier lot number, which I've added in and assigned it to my lot number, or I can go in and do a recall on my lot number. So if I just go start review. So here I will be able to see all of the customers, suppliers, sales orders, purchase orders, and jobs that this lot number is affected by, or this recall is affected by, and I will be able to select what I want to include into the lot. Once I've chosen what I want to include into the lot and click on apply and close, that then populates this mock recall or full recall screen. And from here, I'm basically able to effect a full recall, or which will basically action the quarantine and inspection process, or I can do a mock recall so I can see what the effect of recalling this product will mean for my business. And that's essentially what's happened with product recall and additional lot numbers. Thank you, Darshini. I'll
Fantastic,
just
Roxanne. Thanks.
close this and give it back to you. There we go.
Wonderful. I think the other thing to talk about also with the recall, and in particular the lot functionality, is there are additional fields such as dates, expiry information that is available to us now that makes it far easier to integrate to external quality systems as well, where you're now able to mirror that information in SYSPRO, where you might not necessarily have stored that. You would have stored that just purely in the quality system. So there are a few more integration points as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct.
Excellent. So we've done a whirlwind of SYSPRO 8 and some of the functionality. We've showcased some of it. By no means is this comprehensive. In fact, we talked about the fact that there are 8 releases since the initial launch of 8. And even what you're seeing on screen are purely some of the highlights that we have within SYSPRO 8. As each release comes out, more and more functionality gets in. Some functionality gets introduced to then be improved onto subsequent releases as well. So if you think about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 releases of information, it's about evaluating what's important for your business and what's currently available for you to potentially grow into and start rolling out. I had a number thrown out at me from SYSPRO probably about 6 months ago, where they talked about the fact that with SYSPRO 8, there have been about 1,000 new pieces of functionality come in. Some of it could be as simple as being able to add custom form fields against transactions in inventory and WIP, which is something that's been brand new and released, or it could be a full module, such as the introduction of the warehousing with auto replenishment or embedded analytics, new technology that's being added in. So there is a constant evolution happening within the SYSPRO 8. And all we've done is really just touch the tip of that iceberg today. So Roxanne and I have talked at you a lot. We started with a poll at the beginning of this. I want to go ahead and have another quick poll that I'm launching. What's next for you? Are you already on 8 and interested in your release? You're not yet on 8? Looking to upgrade maybe in the next 3 to 6 months or the next 6 to 18 months, or you have other business priorities. I've got about 45% of you that have voted right now. You're voting quicker than I can say it. Okay, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and it looks like we've probably got 61% that are currently on SYSPRO 8 already, about 25% that are looking to upgrade in the next 3 to 6 months, and 11% that are going to move forward. 4% have other business priorities. Excellent, good. So if you are in the category of already on 8 or not yet on 8 and you want to know more, there are a couple of things I want to point out at you. If you go to help.syspro.com, what you'll see is an online version of all of the new functionality that's available in 8 and the help that's available. Now, when you click on help in SYSPRO, if you're already on 8, it will give you your release specific help. When you go to the external link, such as help.syspro.com, you have access to the help for every individual release. And specifically what I've included in here is the 2022 release information, which gives you access to absolutely everything that's new in 2022, which is the latest release. I haven't gone into just specifically that release because I am conscious that not everyone is on the release prior to that, and there's other functionality that you may not have been aware of or not already leveraging to be able to use. If you are already on 8 and looking at moving up to the latest release, I would encourage you to look at the Nexus page that we have on the 8 update request. That goes into some of the considerations. There are changes in technology, especially when we talk about the crystal changes. That has an impact on the amount of time and effort that it takes to go through and do the upgrade itself. So have a look at that. And what we'll do is on the follow-up email that you'll get at the end of this webinar, we'll include these links as part of it as well. So have a chat with Kelly to make sure that goes through to you. And the webinar is recorded, so it will be made available as well. Thank you again for going ahead and joining us today. Thanks very much. Take
Thank you,
care,
guys.
everyone.
Bye.